So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and I had just moved back with my parents for the free food and rent. This was for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now, my parents were super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being 22 years old and a single guy and living at a house in the sticks, they had just recently moved about 40 miles south of a major Midwest city. It certainly wasn't ideal for me, but I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work to pass the time, then save up some money. Anyway, so summer turned into winter, and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house. So I took up a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay that much, was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, think acres and acres of farms, I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About the same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and helped him clean up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So, my dad's friend's family had a construction-type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and larger machines they owned. This was a small mom-and-pop type thing where everyone knew everyone and the office only opened on days when someone was actually coming by, and was generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owner and the locals. Since I had minored in a business adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date, if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two, discussing prices and availability, etc. Super easy gig. I think the old building where I worked was about 90 years old, and at the top of this little hill, and the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s, when his family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar, and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done. So if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple of days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1. Since I knew I'd be alone, I could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window, and once or twice I saw a family of deer or raccoons scamper by. And I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet. So if something unusual occurred or if something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in because the roads were bad, but I had an old SUV, and more than that, I just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since believe me when I say this, that nobody ever showed up at night, since we literally were in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road, you'd have to be coming to our specific building, and probably know it was there beforehand. It was a locals type thing, and it was very small. Basically, someone would just never get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fallout Boy. Everyone makes mistakes when they're young, and having some coffee, and kept glancing at the snow outside here and there. There was one street light outside which reflected onto the ground at the gate and was causing the light to shine on the snow in a really cool way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to use the bathroom, and then came back upstairs and got settled back into work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow, just below the light. It seemed like it had just been a huge dog or substantial animal that had just rolled around on the ground, there on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes earlier, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom or maybe when my back was turned, since I definitely would have seen this type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed a dog or maybe even a farm animal had gotten loose in the surrounding area. This happens sometimes and maybe it was attracted to the light or something. At around 2 in the morning, I was leaving, and as always, I got out of my car to lock the gate up, and to be honest, I'd pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. When I looked down, I was shocked to see that it just wasn't some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when a kid lies on their back in the snow and pushes their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this when I was a kid, so I was 100% sure that I knew that this was what it was, and it was deliberately made under the light post. But it wasn't from a kid, it was from a very large person, or at the very least a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and I saw what I already knew, that whoever made the snow angel could have easily looked up and had seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom, so I knew someone had to have walked deep into the woods in the freezing cold and snow for a few miles at least, and then do a fucking snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in front of my desk window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow, and I saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building, so it was clear that the person didn't use the road, but instead it came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now, once I realized that someone had just been this close to me, was secretly in the woods now, watching me. And I looked around, but I didn't see anything. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back into my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would have been there in like 4 hours and might see the snow angel and assume I did it, since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but I just felt embarrassed that if he thought it was me, I felt like I would be made fun of for it. But that's when I heard it. There was the loudest high-pitched laughing I've ever heard coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in the Wizard of Oz or something like that. Someone was doing it fake on purpose, and I could tell. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all, since other than the street light, there was no illumination whatsoever. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for like 5 seconds, just listening in a panic. Now, I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night, with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I couldn't completely logistically rule that out at the time. But to me, it honestly felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake, scary laugh in order to scare me. Well, it fucking worked. After that 5 seconds, immediately filled with adrenaline, I got into my car and drove the hell away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure out what happened, and I told my parents the story when they woke up. I didn't have any close friends left in that area that would do this, and if they did, they certainly would have brought it up to me and made fun of me for running away. I found out later that the nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means whoever it was went out into the woods in the night in the freezing cold just to mess with me. I don't have any mental issues or family history, and I don't do drugs. I also didn't believe it was paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I knew someone was out there. I worked there for another 6 weeks or so and never had another issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun now, and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift, and I certainly always locked the gate from this point on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he waited over 2 hours for me just to leave after making the snow angel, just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have easily been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try to find and attack him, yet he didn't seem scared or to care while he tried to mess with me. This happened to me in high school when I was in 11th grade. I was 16 years old. The street I lived on was in New York City, and it was a pretty small street, so you can hear anything that happens at each end of the street. You can hear kids laughing, kids falling from their bikes, etc. This isn't an important detail for the story. Another important detail is the house I lived in only had one front entrance to get in. The front entrance had 2 doors, a screen door, which was the first thing an outsider would see when they approached my house, and a wooden door. Both had locks, so no one could just open the screen door unless they had a key. I was living alone for a month, and it was pretty fun, but also mundane sometimes too. My parents were living in California at that time due to work. One day, while I was on my computer doing something, there were these strange knocks on the front door. I left my room and approached the front wooden door cautiously. I am an easily anxious person, and it doesn't help that I kept watching crime documentary videos. The person on the other side knocked on my screen door again. I peered through the peephole of the wooden door and could see this white, middle-aged dude just standing there, moving his head from side to side, and his body was doing that jumpy movement that people do when they're standing there and waiting. I decided to open the wooden door just a little, thinking the screen door was going to protect me anyway, and asked him, "What's wrong?" The The guy instantly responded, "There's been a car crash. Please come out and help me. A kid was riding his bike and was run over." I asked, "Where's the car crash?" The guy responded, "Down the street over there." He pointed to one of the ends of the street. Remember how I said that the street was very small and I could hear anything? Even a kid falling from his bike? So I sure as hell could have heard a fucking car crash. The second he said that, my guard immediately went up. I said, "Call 911. I don't know what you're coming to me for, but call 911. The guy pushed on with what he was saying before and asked me to come downstairs to check out the car crash with him and see if there's anything we could do to help. I remember saying, "Call 911 or I'll call 911. They'll be able to handle this much better than me." I then closed the wooden door and locked it. If you're wondering, I didn't call 911. I kept looking at the time. I forgot what specific time it was, but I remember it being in the afternoon. I waited for a few hours when I was sure that the guy would be gone. I went back to the front entrance and opened the wooden door, made sure no one was there, and opened the screen door to see if the car crash at the end of the street was actually real. Why did I do this? I wanted to truly make sure that there was no car crash or anything, just in case. I know I said I would have heard it, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring an actual thing that I just might have not heard. There was nothing there. No kid and no crashed car. Just the usual end that I'm used to. At that time, I felt a sense of relief. It's only a few years later when I thought about this moment again and realized that guy may have had some malicious intentions for me. Good thing I kept myself level-headed and realized that there was no way that there could have been a car crash outside without me hearing. God knows what the fuck would have happened.